past was a simpler time, and perhaps nothing tells us this more than the fact that during the 1970s there were, remarkably, 2 celebrity demolition experts in the UK. The popularity of Fred Dibner makes a certain sense, given that he was the subject of several documentaries about steeplejacking and chimney demolition, and his down-to-earth, folksy commentary as he climbed up a vast structure after downing several pints of bitter made his shows both entertaining and oddly soothing, apart from the sheer terror induced by seeing Dibner dangling off the top of a massive chimney supported only by his foot and the miracle of Boddingtons. Slow TV, as we might call it now. More unlikely was the fame of Blaster Bates. Blaster Bates, Derek McIntosh Bates to his family, was another northern demolition expert who, for many years, sat alongside the top comedy stars of the day in the humour section of record stores. Do record shops still have comedy sections? I have no idea, but in the 1970s and 1980s, the racks positively heaved with comedy records on vinyl, and as you flicked through looking for Monty Python, Derek and Clive, Not the 9 O'Clock News or Tony Hancock LPs, you would find what seemed to be an endless number of recordings by Bates. He was a bit of an enigma. Everyone seemed to have heard of him, possibly through seeing these records in the racks, but I don't think I ever met anyone who'd actually heard one of these albums. The LPs were suspected of being a bit blue, thanks in part to warning labels that rather over-egged the rudeness, which might have been a selling point for teenagers, but the albums also looked, well, odd and unappealing. Just who was Blaster Bates, we wondered? A comedy character like Roy Chubby Brown or some other denizen of the working men's club circuit? In a pre-internet age, finding anything out about him seemed impossible, and to be fair, I was never intrigued enough to actually gamble on buying one of the records. His albums were just there, a constant presence to be flipped past while you hunted for something a bit cooler. And then they were gone, as CDs replaced LPs, VHS became the place to go to for comedy kicks, and cultural shifts seemed to make him obsolete. Still, the question of just who or what Blaster Bates was never quite went away. Every now and again the name would pop up either online or re-emerge as some sort of repressed memory, rarely bringing any further information. Eventually I found myself actively seeking out details to satisfy my own curiosity. Had I been missing out on a comedy great all this time? Well, no.
And one morning, I was at Crewe cattle auction. I was approached by a large gentleman, came out of the gentleman's convenient eye, rummaging up and down the front of his trousers like this here. Hey, young fella, he said, I want a word with thee. Somebody said, oh, George is going out in a bit this morning. Now, they got a new truss of a small parasite in his crutch. He said, it's my pit. He said, it's our septic tank and all. I thought, oh dear. He said, yes. He said, I've had a very nasty letter from the council. That was the Cheshire County Council, the all-seeing, all-powerful. I said, like what? He said, well, I got this note. Well, we'd had one of our summers. It had rained for 3 weeks. He said, and the effluviant, not the effluent, the effluviant, is coming out of my pit and going in the ditch. And as the ditch gets into the stream, and the stream meanders through Cheshire, the methane gas given off was putting the roadman asleep on the end of his brush.
Blaster Bates was a man who was full of stories about his adventures blowing things up and related topics. A bit of a character, as people like to say when talking about annoying blokes who would never shut up in the pub. Somehow or other, perhaps because people were more easily impressed back then, or perhaps because he simply taught the air off the right person at the right time, this would lead to his second career as a raconteur. Things seem to have started with appearances on TV shows about local eccentrics, the sort of show that used to be on TV all the time but is now another lost art.
As jobs go, is it a difficult one for you?
Not particularly, no. The square side is facing where the Bates is going to go. If you see the pile of bricks over there, and anybody you don't like, get them sitting on that. That's where it's going, over there.
How many chimneys have you knocked down in your time?
This will be the 238th since 1970. Before that, I didn't keep count. I only started counting in 1970.
Does it please you that that this chimney is going to make way for a new brewery? Because it's going to delight everybody around here, I
couldn't
think.
care less what it makes way for, sir, as long as I get paid for knocking it down.
His rambling style and wealth of mildly comical tales seemed to strike a chord with viewers. This was, after all, the time of the Wheel Tabbers and Shunters Social Club TV show, which aimed to recreate the pleasures of the working man's club. Bates's down-to-earth persona and humorous tales led to appearances as an after-dinner speaker, and his knack for a story, peppered with mild profanity, not to mention a habit of carrying explosives everywhere and lighting the fuse on a stick of gel-ignite while telling a story, casually snuffing it out just before it reached the explosive, soon brought him a following. As was often the case with such things, this then led to a record deal, with not especially well recorded tapings of his live performances transferred to vinyl. Poor quality live recordings gave the records a touch of authenticity. It was like you were there, admittedly at the back of the room struggling to hear over the clanking of pint glasses. These clearly found an audience. He released 8 albums between 1967 and 1984. His most famous track perhaps gives a flavour of what to expect simply from the title, A Shower of Shit Over Cheshire. Although Bates would make several television appearances over the years, these are almost all related to his day job of blowing up chimneys, and although his secondary career was sometimes mentioned, it was never dwelled on. His performances were perhaps too rude during the 1970s, and by the time we got into the 1980s, where vigorous swearing on alternative comedy shows made Bates's mild profanity seem very tame, he was too genuinely working class and down market for TV executives obsessed with attracting the right kind of viewers. He was also perhaps not really suited for the TV format. His rambling stories and salt-of-the-earth style were never going to be a good fit as a guest on chat shows and comedy showcases that wanted a series of short, sharp gags. More to the point though, he was, and remains, clearly an acquired taste. His stories often feel like a conversation with an old and waffling family member who thinks that he's hilarious, and are full of stories of his glory days rather than comedy in any recognisable form. He's also very northern. I've no idea if his comedy made it beyond the Midlands, but I would not be at all surprised to hear that his LPs were far less ubiquitous in London than in Manchester. As much as Bates seemed to enjoy telling stories, blowing things up seemed to be his real passion. He started his demolition business in 1946 when health and safety rules were non-existent, and by all accounts dodged death on several occasions. There is, of course, a curious fascination to be had in watching large buildings demolished. Even today you'll get crowds turning up to watch a major demolition job taking place, and when Bates first reached fame we only had 2 TV channels and 1 radio broadcaster. You had to make your own fun back then. By the time he died in 2006, 2 years after his 1980s rival/replacement Fred Dibner, the idea of celebrity demolition men was already unimaginable, and the thought of men like this being given TV airtime now is laughable. For all the talk of diversity among our media executives, there's no space for this sort of culture on our current image-obsessed broadcast landscape. To be fair, I'm not sure that the world is really crying out for a Blaster Bates revival. The records are increasingly hard work, and his success was, we might reasonably think, a bit of a fluke to begin with. But he does represent a time, a place and a culture that's increasingly ignored, forgotten and denigrated. As such, the records are important not as works of comic genius, but rather as oral records of a culture that has long gone. In that sense, they're as vital as any recording made of dying communities, and probably should be sat in the archives of universities. Comedy these days is increasingly homogenised, sanitised and entirely middle class. Whatever else you might say about Blaster Bates, he was certainly not elitist, precious or pretentious. He was what he was, and perhaps we really do need more of his ilk now. Were you a Blaster Bates fan? Did you buy his records? Did you see him live? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoy this kind of forgotten history, then make sure to like the video, hit the alert bell, subscribe to the Overlooked Hotel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.